In the heart of Lagos, on a night when the entire city went dark, a newborn's cry pierced the silence of a crowded marketplace. She had no name, no family, and no one to claim her. To the world, she was invisible, just another forgotten child. But far above the chaos, from the glass walls of his penthouse, a billionaire watched the city with secrets of his own. He didn't know it yet, but that nameless girl's destiny was about to collide with his empire, shaking everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and legacy. This is the story of the girl who was born with nothing, and the man who gave her everything, including his name. The city of Lagos pulsed with its usual chaos, a restless beast that never slept. Car horns blared in unison, Danfo buses screeched at every turn, and the chatter of traders echoed like a symphony of survival. But on this particular night, the hum of the city was swallowed whole. In a heartbeat, darkness spread as PHCN cut the power, plunging the bustling Obalenda market into pitch black. All that remained was the glow of lanterns, the hiss of kerosene lamps, and the scent of akara frying in hot oil. Then came the cry. A baby's wail pierced the heavy air, shrill and haunting, rising above the noise of restless traders and restless customers. People stopped in their tracks, searching for the source of the sound. A woman selling roasted plantain muttered, "Chineke! Who leaves a baby like this?" Her hands trembled as she tightened her wrapper around her waist. The child was found lying in a woven basket, wrapped in nothing but a faded Ankara cloth. No note, no name, no clue. Just a newborn girl left in the middle of a crowded market during a blackout. Some traders crossed themselves in fear. Others whispered that the child was cursed, that no mother would abandon her blood without reason. But a few dared to say it was destiny, that the baby carried a mysterious blessing. Crowds formed, arguments broke out. Some wanted to call social services, others insisted she be left alone, as if touching her might invite misfortune. But in that sea of hesitation and gossip, one woman stepped forward. Her name was Mama Nkechi, a matron from a small, struggling orphanage on the outskirts of the city. Her wrapper was plain, her sandals worn, but her heart was fierce and unyielding. She lifted the child with steady hands, her eyes filled with both sorrow and defiance. "This one is not cursed," she declared. "This one is chosen." With that, she carried the baby away from the chaos, ignoring the murmurs and the frightened stares. The child's cries quieted, as though she recognized safety in the matron's arms. And just like that, under the broken neon lights of the city, a nameless child found her first protector. Life in the orphanage was not easy. The building's walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked during heavy rains, and meals were stretched thin to feed many mouths. Yet, within those walls, laughter often bloomed. Children chased one another barefoot across dusty floors, and the air was alive with hymns on Sunday mornings. The nameless girl grew amidst this rhythm of scarcity and hope. Mama Nkechi called her Aduke, meaning beloved. But the girl knew deep inside that Aduke was only a borrowed name. The other children mocked her. "You don't even have a real name," they would say, laughing until she hid in corners, hugging her knees, wondering who she truly was. But in those quiet moments of pain, her imagination became her refuge. She would close her eyes and dream of living in a glass mansion where the lights never went out. She dreamed of dining on golden plates, of riding in cars so sleek they looked like moving shadows, of belonging to a name that carried weight across the city. Far away, high above Lagos in his penthouse on Victoria Island, another soul stared out into the same night. Chukwuma Okafor, the man whose empire touched every corner of the Nigerian economy, stood by his glass window, whiskey in hand. His wealth stretched across oil, technology, and global trade. Yet as he gazed at the city's blinking lights, he felt the hollowness of his world. Power had built him towers, but it had not built him peace. Chukwuma's thoughts drifted to the sister he once lost, a void that no fortune had filled. He often wondered if somewhere in the city below there was a soul as restless and incomplete as his own. His instincts told him that fate was drawing him closer to something, or someone, that would change everything. Meanwhile, in the heart of Lagos, Aduke grew sharper, bolder. She learned resilience in scarcity, kindness in teasing, and imagination in emptiness. She carried her namelessness like a wound, but also like a spark. She could feel it. Her life was not meant to stay confined within cracked walls and dusty playgrounds. One humid evening, as children played outside and Mama Nkechi hummed a hymn, a sleek black SUV parked quietly in front of the orphanage gates. Its tinted windows reflected the setting sun. The driver, dressed immaculately, stepped out. His shoes clicked against the rough ground as he approached the matron. He didn't reveal much, only that he represented a wealthy benefactor, curious about the children. His sharp eyes scanned the yard until they landed on Aduke, who stood apart from the others, staring back with a defiance far beyond her years. For the first time in her life, Aduke felt truly seen. That night, Mama Nkechi whispered a prayer over the child as she slept. She didn't know that powerful eyes had just marked the girl, and with that, the wheels of destiny began to turn. Power without connection is emptiness. Chukwuma feels the void in his glass towers. From the 28th floor of the Okafor Global Towers, Lagos stretched out like a glittering mosaic beneath the night sky. Glass skyscrapers reflected the neon glow of billboards, while headlights streamed endlessly along Third Mainland Bridge like veins of light. To outsiders, the view was breathtaking. To Chukwuma Okafor, it was a reminder of how far he had climbed and how alone he had become. Chukwuma's empire was built on innovation and dominance. He had founded tech startups that reshaped Nigeria's digital economy, bought into oil ventures that made him indispensable, and erected skyscraper offices that pierced the Lagos skyline like monuments to his willpower. His private jets flew him across continents. His name opened doors in Abuja, London, and Dubai. In the business world, he was a force of nature, revered for his brilliance and feared for his ruthlessness. But beneath the sharp suits and calculated smiles, Chukwuma carried shadows. His childhood was stained with tragedy. He once had a younger sister, Ifunanya, whose laughter used to echo through their modest home in Enugu. A sudden illness took her life when she was just 10, leaving young Chukwuma shattered. Her absence carved a hollow in him, a hollow that money, influence, and skyscrapers could never fill. He had built his empire not only out of ambition, but out of a desperate attempt to control the chaos that had once stolen his only sibling. Even now, decades later, he often imagined her voice in the silence of his mansion. That mansion, nestled in Banana Island, was a fortress of both beauty and isolation. The rooftop infinity pool shimmered against the city skyline. A smart home system answered his every command with cold efficiency. Hidden within the property was a secret garden where he escaped the noise of his empire, walking alone among flowers that reminded him of his sister's innocence. To his friends, the mansion was a paradise. To Chukwuma, it was a palace of echoes. In the quiet of his solitude, Chukwuma's mind began to wander toward thoughts he rarely entertained. What was the point of building an empire if no one carried its torch forward with heart? What was the value of wealth if it left no human legacy? For the first time, he allowed himself to dwell on forgotten children, the nameless, the abandoned, the overlooked. He thought of them not as charity cases, but as lives full of untapped fire. His confidants noticed the change. Obinna, his lifelong friend and legal advisor, once said half-jokingly, "Oga, are you planning to start an orphanage now?" Chukwuma only smiled, but his silence carried weight. His inner circle whispered, puzzled by this new tenderness that seemed to soften the billionaire who was otherwise all steel and calculation. But Chukwuma's instincts had already taken root. Quietly, without fanfare, he began sponsoring orphanages, attending charity events in disguise, and studying profiles of children who showed unusual resilience. It was not sentimentality. It was strategy. He wasn't seeking to adopt a child. He was searching for a soul strong enough to inherit not only his empire, but his humanity. The reports that crossed his desk often blurred into numbers and statistics. But one story caught his attention. A girl from Mama Nkechi's orphanage. No recorded birth certificate, no name at birth, yet every account described her as stubborn, sharp, imaginative, and unyielding. While other children crumbled under mockery, she endured. While others fought for scraps, she dreamed of skies. There was something in her silence, something in her eyes, that pierced the billionaire's armor, even from a distance. Still, he did not move hastily. He was a man who conquered boardrooms by studying opponents for years before making a single move. Instead, he instructed his aides to keep tabs on her, to learn her habits, to understand her spirit. He did not want a facade. He wanted to know the essence of the nameless girl before fate brought them face to face. And yet, in the neon haze of Lagos nightlife, Chukwuma often found himself thinking of her. At exclusive clubs, where champagne flowed like water, he would stand apart, observing men and women drowning in excess. Their laughter was empty, their ambition shallow. In their hollow eyes, he saw reflections of himself and the reason he needed something more. He would retreat to his penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below, wondering if destiny was weaving threads he could not yet see. Then came the moment he could no longer ignore. His aide, after returning from Mama Nkechi's orphanage, spoke with an unusual spark. "Sir, she is different. She does not break under pressure. She carries herself as though she was born for more than what the world gave her." Chukwuma felt a strange tightening in his chest, a sensation he had not allowed in years. Power, influence, and wealth had built his world of glass, but a girl with no name had managed to stir curiosity in the man who thought nothing could surprise him anymore. That night, standing at his rooftop garden under the hum of Lagos, Chukwuma made a decision. He would not remain a distant observer any longer. He would meet the nameless girl who had unknowingly set his empire trembling. Fate reveals itself in the blink of an eye, in a moment unnoticed by the world. The ballroom glittered like a dream painted in gold. Crystal chandeliers rained light across the polished marble floors. Violins played soft melodies in the background, and the scent of imported roses filled the air. It was the annual Lagos Global Development Gala, where the richest, most powerful, and most envied figures in Africa gathered under one roof to celebrate themselves as much as their causes. For Aduke, this night was like stepping into another universe. She had volunteered with a group of orphanage alumni to serve drinks and assist the guests. Dressed in a simple black uniform, she clutched her tray nervously, her wide eyes devouring the opulence that surrounded her. She had seen skyscrapers, fast cars, and even glimpses of Banana Island mansions on television, but standing in the middle of this glittering hall felt like waking up inside her own impossible dream. She moved carefully between the tables, balancing her tray of champagne glasses as conversations swirled around her. Business mergers worth billions, politicians negotiating behind polite smiles, celebrities flaunting gowns flown in from Paris. She felt invisible, a shadow among giants. And yet, as fate would have it, one man saw her. From across the room, Chukwuma Okafor stood with a group of international investors, but his attention drifted elsewhere. His eyes fell on the young woman, carrying herself with surprising poise despite the tremor in her hands. There was something about the way she held her head high, something about the innocence in her gaze that tugged at his memory. For a brief second, he saw his sister, Ifunanya, the girl he lost decades ago. His heart stumbled. Aduke felt his gaze before she saw him. Her eyes darted across the room and landed on the man everyone whispered about, the billionaire himself. His presence was magnetic, his suit tailored like armor, his expression both commanding and unreadable. And yet, when his eyes met hers, she felt as though the chandeliers dimmed and the world hushed into silence. Their first exchange was brief, almost ordinary. Aduke approached his table to serve drinks. "Champagne, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Chukwuma studied her for a beat longer than necessary before taking the glass. "Thank you," he replied. Just 2 words, but his tone carried something unspoken, something that lingered in the air between them. She turned to leave, but fate had its own script. In her nervousness, her heel caught on the edge of the carpet. The tray tilted, and in a blink, Crystal glasses crashed to the ground, shattering in a pool of golden liquid. The music did not stop, but whispers rippled through the crowd. Aduke froze, her face burning with shame. Before the murmurs could swell into ridicule, Chukwuma rose from his chair. To everyone's shock, the billionaire stooped down, picked up a piece of broken glass, and said with a rare smile, "Even the best stumble." His voice was calm, gentle, completely unlike the ruthless titan they all knew. The crowd hushed. Aduke stammered an apology, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, sir." Chukwuma's eyes softened. "It's only glass," he said simply, and for a moment his presence shielded her from the judgment of 100 eyes. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he left the room, leaving Aduke stunned. That night, back at her small dormitory near the orphanage, Aduke replayed the moment in her mind. The chandeliers, the whispers, the billionaire's unexpected kindness, it all blurred into a dream she couldn't shake. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling an inexplicable pull in her chest. She didn't know what it meant, but she sensed this was not the last time their paths would cross. Meanwhile, at his mansion in Banana Island, Chukwuma sat alone in his rooftop garden, staring at the Lagos skyline. He thought of the girl, the way she had stood her ground, despite embarrassment, the way her eyes held both fragility and strength. For years, he had built walls around his heart, but tonight, a stranger's stumble had slipped through his defenses. The elites were not blind either. Gossip began to flow like wine. "Did you see how Okafor looked at that girl?" whispered one socialite. "Who is she?" murmured another. They didn't know her name, but in their envy, they gave her importance she never asked for. The contrast between Aduke's world and the one she had glimpsed could not be sharper. The cracked walls of her orphanage, the meager meals stretched for dozens of children, the hum of generators during power outages, all of it seemed galaxies away from marble floors and gold-plated chandeliers. And yet, somewhere in between those two worlds, her destiny was quietly unfolding. The spark had been lit. She could feel it in her restless heart. He could feel it in his haunted silence. Neither understood it yet, but fate had tied them together in a knot. No wealth, no gossip, no circumstance could undo. Alone in his study, Chukwuma poured himself a glass of wine and spoke quietly to his aide. "Find out everything about her." The order was calm, but his voice carried a weight that made the aide's spine stiffen. For the first time in years, Chukwuma Okafor was not studying a rival, a business venture, or a political opportunity. He was studying a girl, a nameless girl whose very existence unsettled his empire of glass. When opportunity knocks, it carries both wonder and danger. The call came one humid afternoon, the kind of day when Lagos traffic felt like a living monster, snarling and unrelenting. Aduke was still adjusting glasses in the orphanage's small library when Mama Nkechi appeared at the door, holding the phone with trembling hands. "They say it's from Okafor Global," Mama whispered, eyes wide. Aduke's heart lurched. She pressed the receiver to her ear, her voice hesitant. On the other end, a deep, steady tone introduced itself. "This is Chukwuma Okafor. I would like you to visit my headquarters tomorrow. I believe we should talk." The line went silent, leaving Aduke staring into space, her breath caught between disbelief and awe. The man whose name commanded boardrooms had spoken to her, directly. The next morning, Aduke's journey to Victoria Island became a pilgrimage of transformation. She squeezed into a Danfo bus, sweat trickling down her brow as hawkers shouted and passengers argued over fares. The yellow vehicle rattled through traffic, inching along crowded roads where vendors carried trays of bottled water, gala sausage rolls, and puff-puff. As the bus crawled closer to the island, the scenery shifted. Dilapidated buildings gave way to glass towers, flashy billboards, and sleek cars gliding on smooth asphalt. Aduke felt her heartbeat quicken. It was as though she were crossing from one world into another, from the survival of the ordinary to the glamour of the extraordinary. The Okafor Global Headquarters was impossible to miss. A skyscraper of shimmering glass stretched toward the heavens, its exterior reflecting the Lagos skyline in fractured brilliance. The security gates parted silently as her name was confirmed, And suddenly Aduke was no longer just another girl in traffic. She was a guest invited into the heart of power. Inside, the building pulsed with wealth and precision. Marble floors gleamed beneath her shoes. Walls displayed artwork curated from across Africa, and giant digital screens showcased Okafor Global's latest achievements. Employees in sharp suits moved briskly, some throwing discreet glances at the young woman whose modest dress set her apart. When she stepped into Chukwuma's office, it felt like walking into the command center of the city itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Lagos, its bridges, its skyscrapers, its crowded streets. Behind an ebony desk, Chukwuma rose to greet her, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. "Welcome, Aduke," he said, his voice smooth yet deliberate. "Please, sit." Her hands trembled as she lowered herself into the leather chair opposite him. She expected interrogation, perhaps cold businesslike questions. Instead, he surprised her. "Tell me about your childhood," he began, leaning back, eyes intent but gentle. Aduke hesitated, but his tone carried no judgment. Slowly, she spoke of the orphanage, of Mama Nkechi's kindness, of teasing from other children, of dreaming under broken ceilings about a life she couldn't name. Chukwuma listened intently, nodding at intervals, his expression unreadable, but not cold. "And what do you dream of now?" he asked softly. Her lips parted. No one had ever asked her that. "To belong," she admitted, voice breaking. "To be someone whose name means something. To live, not just survive." Something flickered in Chukwuma's eyes, a recognition, almost a reflection of his own past. He leaned forward. "I cannot give you the past you lost, but I can give you the tools to shape your future." He explained his vision, a mentorship unlike any other. She would learn under his guidance, be exposed to the workings of his empire, be equipped with education, power, and opportunity. Not as charity, but as an investment in her potential. The words felt like thunder in Aduke's chest. Her mind raced with images, of walking into rooms where her name commanded respect, of shedding the cloak of namelessness, of finally having an identity that no one could mock. But with excitement came fear. Could she survive in a world where even shadows had power? Could she carry the weight of being linked to a man like Chukwuma Okafor? She glanced at his aides, standing discreetly by the door. Their eyes held calculation, as though they were measuring her worth, already deciding whether she deserved the space she had been offered. Beyond those walls, she imagined rivals whispering, questioning why she had caught his attention. The pressure pressed against her chest, but alongside it bloomed something new, a sense of belonging, fragile but real. For the first time in her life, Aduke was being chosen, not ignored, seen, not hidden. Chukwuma's voice cut through her storm of thoughts. "You do not have to answer today. But know this, Aduke, you have the strength I once searched for. And if you accept, you will never walk nameless again." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. The girl who had once hidden from cruel laughter at the orphanage now sat in a glass tower, with Lagos sprawling at her feet. The choice was hers. And though fear clawed at her, something deeper, hope, destiny, courage, rose louder. "I accept," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Chukwuma studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. The decision was sealed. Aduke left the skyscraper that day, not realizing the enormity of what she had agreed to. She carried only the faint weight of possibility in her chest, unaware that the name Okafor would change her life forever, and with it, the balance of power in Lagos. A name can birth a new destiny, yet chains it at the same time. The ceremony was private, but its weight was monumental. No cameras, no flashing lights, no reporters hungry for headlines. Just a select few gathered in the sunlit atrium of Chukwuma's Banana Island mansion, where marble floors gleamed beneath their feet and soft music floated in the background. Aduke stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped tightly, heart pounding against her ribs. The simple white dress she wore seemed both too plain and too heavy for the occasion. Her eyes darted nervously to the gilded walls, the portraits of Chukwuma's ancestors, the quiet confidence of the staff who lined the room. Then he entered. "Chukwuma, dressed in an elegant agbada stitched with subtle gold threads, carried a small velvet box in his hand. His steps were measured, his face composed, but in his eyes there was something Aduke had never seen before. Pride, softened with something dangerously close to affection. He stopped in front of her, his deep voice resonating through the hall. Aduke, for too long you have walked this world without a name to anchor you. Today, that ends. From this moment forward, you carry not only my name, but also its weight, its legacy, and its promise. Opening the velvet box, he revealed a diamond pendant, shaped like a shield, engraved with the Okafor crest. The gems caught the sunlight, scattering fragments of light across the room. Carefully, he fastened the pendant around her neck. Aduke's breath caught as the cool chain rested against her skin. It wasn't just jewelry, it was identity. It was belonging. Tears stung her eyes, but her lips curved into a trembling smile. The orphan who, once cowered in the corners of playgrounds, now bore the name that commanded boardrooms, headlines, and governments. Joy surged through her, but woven into it was fear. For with this new name came expectations, scrutiny, and chains she had not yet learned to carry. From that day on, Aduke's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. She was escorted in sleek black SUVs, their engines purring like beasts of steel. The private jet that once seemed like a myth now carried her across borders. A high-rise apartment overlooking Echo Atlantic was prepared for her, its glass walls opening to panoramic views of Lagos that made her feel both invincible and small. The staff addressed her as Miss Okafor, their voices tinted with both respect and curiosity. She caught whispers in corridors, glances exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. Who is this girl? Why her? Their suspicion was subtle but sharp, and every day she fought the quiet voice in her own mind that whispered the same question. Imposter syndrome wrapped around her like a second skin. Sitting in boardrooms surrounded by seasoned executives, Aduke sometimes felt like a child, wearing her mother's heels. She stumbled through financial jargon, trying to follow strategies that seemed like riddles carved in stone. But where her knowledge faltered, her instincts sparked. Her questions, though simple, often revealed truths others had overlooked. Slowly, curiosity became her shield. Chukwuma watched from a distance. He rarely praised her openly, but his eyes lingered on her longer than they should, and his silence carried approval more powerful than words. Pride swelled in him, tempered by emotions he struggled to name. He had meant to shape her into a protégé, yet he found himself growing attached in ways he had not anticipated. To guide her, he introduced her to mentors, brilliant women who had climbed their own ladders of influence, seasoned men who understood the ruthless language of markets. They taught her about negotiation, leadership, and resilience. Aduke listened, absorbed, and began to find her own rhythm. Yet, even as she grew, shadows lurked. Rivalries stirred within Chukwuma's circle. Board members who had long waited for his favor now muttered about the sudden rise of a young woman with no pedigree. Old allies questioned whether his judgment was clouded by sentiment. Some even began to position themselves quietly, setting traps with smiles and wine glasses. Through it all, Aduke carried her pendant like armor. At night, when doubt gnawed at her, she would trace its edges and remember Mama Nkechi's words. This one is chosen, but even chosen ones are tested. One evening, as Aduke reviewed documents late in her new apartment, she noticed something unsettling. One of Chukwuma's most trusted aides lingered too long outside her door, his eyes sharp with an interest that went beyond loyalty. When he finally stepped inside under the pretense of delivering files, his smile didn't reach his eyes. His questions felt too pointed, his curiosity too probing. Aduke's instincts, honed in the orphanage, where survival depended on reading people, stirred uneasily. Something about him whispered danger. Not immediate, not loud, but insidious, waiting for the right moment. That night, as the city lights flickered across her window, Aduke realized that while she had gained a name, she had also stepped into a battlefield where power wore many disguises, and betrayal often came dressed as loyalty. Hearts navigate dangerous terrain when power and attraction collide. The first time Tolu made Aduke laugh, it was over something small, a crooked tie before a board review. He stood at her door with a stack of briefing folders and a grin that softened the sharpness of corporate mornings. "If you're going to conquer this room," he said, loosening the knot, "at least let your tie be straight." She didn't wear a tie, of course, but a silk scarf had been sitting askew on her neck, flustered by the Lagos heat and her nerves. He adjusted it, with a respectful distance, fingertips hovering like he was tuning a delicate instrument, and the anxiety in her chest loosened into a ripple of laughter. Tolu was Chukwuma's assistant in title, but in practice he was the quiet pulse of the empire, anticipating meetings before calendars knew them, smoothing egos before they wrinkled into conflict, translating corporate thunder into understandable rain. With Aduke, he was meticulous without condescension. He brought context to acronyms, stories to spreadsheets, and humanity to headlines. When she doubted the shape of her presence in those glass rooms, Tolu's calm became a mirror in which she could see herself as competent, not accidental. Yet in the corridors of wealth, affection wears disguises. There were glances that lingered too long, silences that hummed, questions that carried more care than protocol demanded. Chukwuma noticed them all. He was never unkind to Tolu, never curt to Aduke. He simply existed near them with a gravity that bent space. Doors opened for Aduke quicker when he walked beside her. Conversations shifted tone when his shadow crossed a threshold. His posture said protection. His eyes said caution. The unstated triangle formed like a watermark across every shared room. At night, the rooftop became their confessional. The city breathed around them, Echo Atlantic's lights flickering like constellations drawn by human hands, the murmur of waves kissing the jetty, the distant chorus of generators stitching power where PHCN left gaps. Tolu would join Aduke there with cups of ginger tea. They traded stories of first failures and secret strengths. He admitted he learned diplomacy the hard way after an early career misstep. She confessed how her chest still tightened when introductions paused on her surname, as if waiting to test its authenticity on her tongue. Sometimes it was Chukwuma who appeared. Instead, late, when the air thinned to velvet. He didn't bring tea. He brought clarity, asking questions that pried open her confidence like sunlight through blinds. What problem were they actually trying to solve with that proposal, he would ask. And suddenly, the day's noise arranged itself into patterns she could read. Those rooftop sessions blurred the boundary between business mentorship and the discipline of self-worth. She learned negotiation as a language of values. She learned silence as a tactic. She learned the difference between being chosen and being ready. But triangles insist on geometry. On a Tuesday breakfast at a Victoria Island hotel, an heiress with sparkling nails and a voice like soft thunder leaned across a table and said loudly enough for floating ears, "Pretty protégé, brave of Okafor to diversify his philanthropy." The chuckles were sugar-coated, but sharp. Rumor travels faster than a convoy in Lagos traffic, and soon the whispers braided into a narrative. The nameless girl and the billionaire, the assistant who hovered, the implication that feelings, not merit, tilted the scales. Aduke felt it in handshakes that squeezed too warmly, in smiles that didn't reach eyes, in questions disguised as compliments. She held her ground. She had learned that some rooms test your poise simply by pretending you don't deserve oxygen. To Tolu, she said, "I will not be the echo of their gossip." To Chukwuma, she said nothing, but her work spoke. She mapped customer pain points in a pilot fintech product and found a hidden fee structure that alienated first-time users. She proposed a fix, staged a listening session with market traders in Surulere, and returned with an insight that saved a launch from quiet failure. In the debrief, Chukwuma's praise was a single nod, yet the pride behind it vibrated like a plucked string. Still, hearts are not spreadsheets. One evening, Tolu arrived on the rooftop with a confession crouched behind a joke. "I practiced this speech," he said, "and it was terrible in every version." He told her he admired her steel wrapped in gentleness, that he wanted to stand closer, not as a handler of calendars, but as a keeper of moments. Aduke listened, the city flickering on her skin. She liked him. his steadiness, his wit, his refusal to treat her like a rumor. But a different gravity tugged at her. When Chukwuma stepped into a room, the air changed. When he looked at her, the imposter in her bones went quiet, as though someone had finally recognized the language she was born speaking. The past pressed its palms against the glass. In quiet flashes, she remembered the orphanage courtyard at dusk, the smell of charcoal smoke, the echo of laughter that excluded, the ache of watching families arrive and leave with children who had names. Longing had taught her to read the world's subtle rejections. Loss had taught her to guard the small flames she carried. Now, in a palace of windows, the same lessons returned, wearing tuxedos and press releases. To choose affection here was to choose a public thesis. To trust here was to gamble reputation as collateral. Chukwuma's conflict grew proper edges. Duty warned him to keep mentorship unsentimental, to protect her future from his presence. Love, if that was the word forming, slow and stubborn, whispered that his life had been a long corridor waiting for this door. Propriety wrote memos in his head. Memory rippled. Ifunanya's laughter, a boy's helplessness before loss, a man's fortress built of schedules and steel. He could feel his rules buckling like heat haze above a runway. The elites kept score. Some tried to befriend Aduke with velvet traps. Dinners that felt like auditions. Invitations that ended with proposals dressed as partnerships. She practiced saying no without apology. She practiced saying yes without surrender. And every time Tolu stood beside her during a negotiation clinic or a product demo, she felt safe, seen, understood. Every time Chukwuma's hand grazed the back of a chair near hers, proximity crackled into a live wire. Then the hidden hinge turned. In a hushed corner of the mansion's library, searching for a strategy deck, Aduke found a bound internal dossier labeled with a project code name she'd only heard whispered, Aster. It contained photographs and performance notes, not about competitors, but about young women Chukwuma had mentored privately over the years, each spotlighted for potential, each chapter ending abruptly after a transition. None were scandalous. They were clinical, careful, almost tender. But the pattern unsettled her. The intimacy of attention, the quiet endings, the sense that she might be another exquisite hypothesis in a long experiment of legacy. Heart thudding, Aduke closed the dossier and stared at her pendant in the glass. Okafor blazing at her throat, wondering if the man who made her feel seen had also built a history of vanishing acts. Even a new name cannot erase the shadows of a past unclaimed. The mansion was quiet that night, the kind of silence that carried secrets rather than peace. Aduke wandered through the west wing, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a nagging ache that had been growing since she discovered the Aster dossier. She needed to know more about the man who had placed his name on her shoulders, a man whose kindness often felt heavy with mystery. She found herself before a locked wooden door lined with brass, far older than the sleek glass and chrome of the rest of the house. The handle was warm, as though touched often. It surprised her when it turned easily under her palm, revealing a study lit dimly by amber lamps. The air smelled faintly of cedar and aged paper. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with books and albums. A large chest rested against the far wall, embossed with the initials C.O. Aduke knelt, lifting the lid, and inside were pieces of a life carefully stored. Faded photographs, handwritten letters, childhood drawings. One photograph caught her breath. A young Chukwuma, smiling with a girl about her age now. His arm was draped protectively around her shoulders, his eyes gleaming with the pride of an older brother. On the back, in neat cursive, it read, Ifunanya, my little light. Aduke felt her chest tighten. She flipped through more letters, journals scribbled with grief, rage, and vows never to be powerless again after losing her. She understood, suddenly, the fortress he had built around his life, the ruthless ambition, the guarded tenderness, the need to control every variable. He wasn't only protecting her, he was protecting himself from the wound that had never healed. But as she held the photograph closer, she whispered to herself, Am I just another Ifunanya to him? A replacement? Her question lingered in the air, like incense smoke. The next day, storms gathered, not in the skies, but in the empire. A rival emerged, a sharp and ambitious woman named Amara Ide, CEO of a competing fintech company. Amara was as brilliant as she was ruthless, and she questioned Aduke's sudden rise openly in business circles. "She has a pendant, not pedigree," Amara sneered during a televised panel. "Let us see if she can stand on her own merit." The comment went viral. Aduke's name filled blogs, Twitter threads, gossip shows. Overnight, she was no longer invisible. She was a mystery to unravel, a target to criticize, a symbol of favoritism in the eyes of elites who hated disruption. Instead of shrinking, Aduke faced the storm by returning to her roots. She visited Mama Nkechi's orphanage, cameras discreetly trailing her. The children ran to her, tugging at her dress, their laughter genuine and unfiltered. She knelt among them, sharing meals of jollof rice and fried plantain, letting their joy remind her of where she came from. She was not only an Okafor, she was still Aduke, the girl who had survived mockery with imagination and grit. That visit lit the media with contrasting images. One day, she was the glamorous ward of a billionaire. The next, she was the barefoot girl laughing with orphans. People began to argue, was she genuine or calculated? Was she heart or performance? Back at the mansion, the tension between her and Chukwuma cracked open. She confronted him in the library, holding Ifunanya's photograph. "Am I only here because you lost her?" she asked, voice trembling. His eyes darkened, the pain visible in their depths. "You are here because you remind me of strength," he said, "because I see a future in you, not a shadow of the past." For the first time, his voice broke. Vulnerability spilled where control usually reigned. Aduke realized that trust was not a gift freely given in his world. It was a bleeding wound reluctantly exposed. Their bond deepened, even as the world pressed against them. She began stepping into meetings, not as a silent learner, but as a voice, questioning strategies, suggesting alternatives, challenging seasoned executives. Some dismissed her. Others, reluctantly, began to listen. Power shifted subtly, like sand rearranging under waves. Yet inside her chest, a question gnawed. Did they respect her because she was Aduke, or because she bore the name Okafor? She carried that doubt like a secret weight, smiling in public, restless in private. Cultural rhythms anchored her through the chaos. She found solace in Yoruba drumming at a traditional celebration, in Igbo folktales retold by elders at a charity event, in the smells of suya and palm wine at street festivals. These moments reminded her that she was not an imported ornament into Chukwuma's empire. She was a child of Nigeria, rooted and resilient. But destiny does not wait for readiness. One evening, as Aduke stepped into the marble lobby of the Okafor Global Tower, she froze. A man stood there, his face weathered but familiar. His eyes widened when he saw her, disbelief trembling on his lips. "Aduke," he whispered, as though saying her name unlocked a forgotten vault. Her blood ran cold. Someone from the shadows of her past had emerged, carrying answers, or dangers, that could unravel everything she had built. The girl who had fought so hard to embrace a new name now stood on the edge of a revelation that could snatch it all away. Every empire tests the mettle of its heirs. Every heart endures its own trials. The morning Lagos sun cut sharp against the glass of Okafor Global Towers, illuminating Aduke as she sat across from a panel of executives. She had been entrusted with her first major project, a fintech expansion into rural Nigeria, aimed at bridging the gap between urban elites and farmers who traded with cash. It was the kind of project seasoned professionals battled over, yet Chukwuma had handed it to her. "You'll lead this," he had said simply, his tone making no room for argument. The weight of it pressed into Aduke's chest, but beneath the pressure was fire. For the first time, she wasn't just learning. She was commanding. The plan required not just financial models, but cultural sensitivity, logistics across treacherous roads, and trust building in communities suspicious of big city promises. Aduke immersed herself. She traveled to Ibadan and Ilorin, meeting farmers under mango trees, listening to market women whose hands were calloused from years of trade. She sketched notes by lantern light, her pendant glinting as she bent over notebooks. Back in Lagos, she presented findings to the board. She spoke of dignity as much as profit, insisting that success lay in respect, not extraction. Some executives shifted uncomfortably, unused to empathy in their spreadsheets. But others, grudgingly, saw the brilliance in her approach. Tolu was by her side through it all, late nights drafting strategies, early mornings refining pitches. Yet admiration curdled into something heavier. He watched her, brilliance glow under Chukwuma's approving gaze, and jealousy gnawed at his loyalty. More than once, his jokes carried barbs. "Careful, Aduke. Around here, stars that shine too quickly burn out." His words unsettled her. She valued Tolu's friendship, perhaps even more, but the sharpness of his tone hinted at wounds she couldn't heal. Their bond strained, caught between affection and rivalry. Meanwhile, rivals circled like sharks. Amara Ide, relentless and calculating, saw Aduke's rise as both threat and opportunity. She invited Aduke to private dinners, offering partnerships draped in compliments. But beneath the perfume and polished smiles lay manipulation. "Join forces with me," Amara purred, "and I'll ensure you're more than a pendant in Chukwuma's empire." Aduke declined politely, but her refusal painted a target on her back. Then came the scandal. A leak suggested that Okafor Global had inflated numbers on a prior project, a shadow that spread quickly across social media. Chukwuma faced heated questions, and though Aduke had no hand in the affair, whispers tied her name to it. Commentators online spat, "Another puppet groomed for empire." She could have hidden in silence. Instead, Aduke confronted the storm. Digging into the files, she discovered subtle sabotage. A junior executive had been feeding misinformation to the press, likely planted by rivals. She faced a choice: expose the culprit publicly and risk fracturing the company further, or handle it quietly and risk looking complicit. She chose integrity. In a tense board meeting, Aduke laid out the evidence with calm precision, naming the betrayal, but also urging reforms that would prevent it from happening again. Her voice did not shake. Her proposal was not revenge, it was renewal. The room, filled with men twice her age, fell silent as they realized she was not merely carrying Chukwuma's name, she was carving her own. That night, alone on her balcony overlooking Echo Atlantic, Aduke let the weight of the day wash over her. She replayed the looks on the executives' faces, Tolu's simmering distance, Amara's veiled threats, Chukwuma's brief but unmistakable pride. She thought of the orphanage, of children running barefoot on dusty grounds, and realized she was no longer that girl. She was something more, something unshaken, forged in fire. Nigeria itself seemed to mirror her duality. By day, she moved through traffic jams, street hawkers, and bustling markets alive with pepper soup aromas and the laughter of bargaining. By night, she stepped into black-tie events where champagne glittered and politics hid in toasts. She existed in both worlds, belonging fully to neither, yet shaping both. Her reflections birthed resilience. She whispered to herself, "I am not just Okafor. I am Aduke. Both matter." The words grounded her, a mantra against the storm of gossip and rivalry. But unseen eyes watched her ascent. At a dimly lit lounge in Victoria Island, a man in a tailored suit sipped brandy as he studied footage of her board presentations. His lips curled into a faint smile. He was no rival in the media, no executive in Okafor Global, but a benefactor with resources of his own. "Interesting," he murmured. "The girl carries both fire and fracture. She may be useful or dangerous." Cliffhanger. Aduke had passed her first great test, but somewhere in the shadows of Lagos, a powerful stranger marked her as the next piece in his game. A challenge she could not yet see coming. The sharpest pain often comes from those we trust most. It began with whispers. Aduke noticed small inconsistencies at the mansion, conversations repeated back to her by strangers, boardroom discussions leaking before strategies were finalized, confidential reports landing in rival hands. At first, She thought it coincidence, but the pattern sharpened with every passing week. Someone close to her, someone inside the walls she called safe, was feeding the shadows. The discovery came one evening when she followed a trail of carelessly dropped papers down a polished hallway. The pages were duplicates of documents she had only reviewed in private with Tolu. Her pulse hammered as she turned a corner and saw one of Chukwuma's most trusted aides, Obina, the man who had served as his legal confidant for years, slipping a sealed folder into the hands of Amara Edie's assistant. Aduke froze, the sound of her own breath loud in her ears. Betrayal had a face now, one that had smiled warmly at her, offered advice, and called her "little sister." When she confronted Chukwuma, his reaction was not fury, but devastation. He sank into his leather chair, his shoulders heavy, his eyes glassy. "Obina," he whispered, as though naming the betrayal made it impossible to deny. For decades, this man had stood by him, through victories and scandals alike. To lose him now felt like losing a limb. Aduke reached out, resting her hand on the edge of his desk. "We can't let this destroy us." He lifted his gaze, and for the first time, she saw the boy he once was. The boy who had lost his sister, the boy who built walls because people always left. "Do you see now, Aduke?" he said quietly. "This is why I do not trust easily." His words struck her deeply, for they mirrored her own story. The teasing at the orphanage, the sting of being overlooked by families who came to adopt others, but never her, the endless ache of abandonment. Betrayal had always hovered near her life, a shadow that returned the moment she believed she was safe. But she would not let it consume her. She would not be the girl left behind again. The betrayal spread through the empire like wildfire. Rivals circled with sharpened smiles. Amara wasted no time capitalizing on the scandal, feeding the press with insinuations that Aduke herself had been the weak link, the naive girl unfit for empire. Hashtags trended overnight. "Pendant Princess" and "Okafor Mistake." Each headline was a dagger. Still, Aduke stood tall. Instead of lashing out, she used what Mama Nkechi had once taught her: watch, listen, then strike with wisdom. She began tracking patterns of leaks, cross-referencing times, and access points. In boardrooms, she kept her composure, even as older executives smirked at her supposed incompetence. Behind the scenes, she quietly rebuilt networks of trust with younger staff who admired her resilience. Her intelligence became her armor, her emotional acuity her weapon. And when the time came, she exposed Obina publicly, not with rage, but with evidence so meticulous that no rival could twist it. The board gasped as she laid bare emails, meeting notes, and financial transfers. She ended with a calm statement. "It is not blood or years of service that build loyalty. It is integrity. Without it, no empire survives." The room erupted into murmurs. Chukwuma's eyes burned with pride and sorrow in equal measure. But if business had steadied, the heart remained a storm. Tolu's distance had deepened into sharp edges. One night, on the rooftop, where confessions once healed, his words cut instead. "You think he sees you as an equal? He sees you as a shadow of someone he lost, and you—" his voice cracked. "You choose him over everyone who truly cares." Aduke's heart twisted. She had never promised him love, but his jealousy poisoned the air between them. Worse, it made her question herself. Was she truly carving her own destiny, or was she just filling a void in Chukwuma's life? Romantic tension coiled tight between the three. In quiet moments, Aduke felt the pull of Chukwuma's presence, the way his gaze silenced her doubts, the way his rare smile steadied her storms. Yet guilt gnawed at her when Tolu's wounded eyes lingered too long, accusing her without words. In the sleepless nights that followed, Aduke revisited the past in flashes. She remembered sitting under a leaking roof at the orphanage, dreaming of belonging. She remembered watching other children leave with families, whispering to herself that one day she too would be chosen. Now she had been chosen, but the price was higher than she imagined. She grew sharper, her voice commanding in boardrooms, her instincts trusted even by skeptics. She was no longer the silent girl with a pendant. She was a strategist, a leader, a force. But she also carried the heavy truth that betrayal was never fully behind her. It lived in every shadow she turned her back to. And then came the spark that threatened to ignite everything. A journalist called during a late-night strategy session, voice urgent. "Miss Okafor, I have evidence that will change how the world sees you and him. Tomorrow, it goes public." Aduke's grip tightened on the phone. Whatever revelation was about to surface would not only test her place in Chukwuma's empire, it might tear them apart forever. True power is measured in legacy, not currency. The revelation never came. Chukwuma moved swiftly, his influence shielding Aduke from the journalist's story before it reached the public. But instead of retreating into silence, he did something unexpected. At a business summit in Abuja, surrounded by international investors, politicians, and media cameras, he stood beside her and declared, "This is Aduke Okafor. She is not here because of my name. She is here because of her mind, her courage, and her vision. From today, she will lead initiatives under our foundation, on her own merit." The hall erupted in applause. Headlines the next morning blazed, not with scandal, but with admiration. Okafor's protege or partner. The young woman rewriting legacy. For Aduke, it was the moment the chains broke. No longer did she feel like a borrowed identity or a fragile pendant on a gold chain. She stepped into the role with her back straight, her voice clear, and her heart steady. She was Aduke Okafor, and the world would learn her name. Her first move as a public figure was not to court boardrooms, but to return to the streets that raised her. She spearheaded initiatives in rural education, digital literacy, and women's entrepreneurship. In Jos, she launched a center where market women could learn to use mobile banking apps. In Enugu, she unveiled programs that turned abandoned lots into cooperative gardens. In Lagos, she partnered with universities to mentor young innovators. Her approach was deeply cultural, deliberately weaving Nigerian identity into modern progress. Yoruba drumming opened her events. Igbo proverbs framed her speeches. Hausa artists painted murals on the walls of new digital hubs. She insisted that heritage was not a relic, but a foundation, and by embracing it, she won both respect and resonance. Rivals who once dismissed her as ornamental began to retreat. Amara Ida's sharp tongue softened in the face of Aduke's steady rise. Board members who once smirked during her presentations now deferred to her insights. Even the gossip columns shifted tone, replacing ridicule with admiration. Yet while the empire thrived, the heart found its own reckoning. The tension between her and Chukwuma reached its quiet climax one evening on the mansion rooftop. Lagos glittered below them, restless and alive. But the world seemed to pause as he finally spoke what his eyes had carried for months. "Aduke," he said softly, "I feared giving you my name would chain you. But instead, you've taught me that love is not about possession. It's about trust." Her chest ached with the truth she had long hidden. "And I feared being nothing more than your shadow. But you've shown me that I was always enough, with or without the name." The space between them dissolved. What began as mentorship, then burdened with doubt, blossomed into something undeniable. Their hands met, tentative but steady, sealing not just affection, but a mutual acknowledgement of growth. It was not the fiery rush of fantasy, but the deep warmth of two souls who had walked through storms together and emerged whole. Forgiveness wove itself into their story. Chukwuma forgiving himself for the ghosts of his past. Aduke forgiving herself for doubting her worth. Trust became their currency, richer than naira, more binding than contracts. Their love did not weaken their empire, it strengthened it. Together, they launched empowerment programs for orphanages, scholarships for girls with no records of birth, mentorship circles where Aduke herself sat with teenagers, listening as they confessed dreams she once carried. She became not just a symbol of resilience, but a living bridge between the forgotten and the powerful. In banquet halls where chandeliers glittered, she wore Ankara gowns tailored with modern elegance, walking confidently beside Chukwuma. In villages where drums called communities together, she knelt on mats, eating tuwo with her hands, her laughter ringing among children. She was both worlds, unapologetically. Her emotional resolution was complete. She no longer feared being nameless, nor did she fear being swallowed by the Okafor legacy. She was a duke, chosen, proven, and self-defined. And yet, in the midst of triumph, subtle foreshadowing whispered at the edges. At an international gala in Dubai, a foreign philanthropist raised his glass toward her with a knowing smile, saying, "Miss Okafor, Africa has heard your name. Soon, the world will call it too." The words sounded like praise, but the weight behind them hinted at something else. A new horizon of challenges, opportunities, and tests waiting just beyond the glow of victory. Aduke returned to Lagos with her heart full and her name solidified. But in the shadows of global ambition, the next chapter of her destiny stirred restlessly, waiting to be claimed. Every shadow conquered reveals the light of potential. The journey from nameless girl to woman of legacy had not been easy, but Aduke carried every scar as proof of survival. In boardrooms where her pendant once drew suspicion, she now entered with the confidence of someone who had walked through fire. Yet her true strength lay not only in strategy, but in the memories she carried from the orphanage. When executives debated rural expansion, Aduke reminded them of the market women who bartered under the sun, children who studied by candlelight. "Do not build for statistics," she told them, her voice clear. "Build for people. I was one of them once." Her words silenced skeptics, not by power, but by truth. This grounding became her signature. She integrated her past into her present, weaving empathy into corporate structures. In one project, she designed micro-grant programs named after Mama Nkechi, ensuring women like her could expand their small businesses. In another, she turned part of her apartment into a think tank where young minds brainstormed solutions to Nigerian challenges: traffic, energy, housing. She knew that to sustain an empire, it must serve more than itself. Chukwuma, once a man wrapped in glass and distance, began to change too. Where he had once stood apart, now he walked beside her, openly. At galas, he introduced her not as protégé, but as partner. In quiet moments, he let down the walls that had imprisoned him for years. One evening, overlooking the lagoon, he took her hand and said simply, "I do not want to love in silence anymore." It was not a confession drenched in poetry, but it was honest, and that made it priceless. For a duke, who had once feared being nothing more than a shadow of his grief, the words healed wounds she had never dared touch. Cultural threads wove through their lives with vibrant richness. Aduke embraced both tradition and modernity, appearing in elite circles with aso-oke gowns cut into contemporary silhouettes, gel tied with precision, jewelry that told stories of ancestry. At home, she insisted on jollof rice spiced just right, pepper soup on rainy evenings, suya shared with staff as laughter spilled across the compound. Her authenticity endeared her to people. She was proof that one could rise without discarding one's roots. Business conflicts gradually eased as her results silenced doubters. Emotional conflicts, too, found resolution. Tolu, though hurt, found new purpose, leading a mentorship program abroad, allowing their bond to soften without rivalry. Rivals like Amara retreated, conceding respect in grudging admiration. For once, the battlefield cleared, and in its place grew peace. Aduke also found closure for her deepest wound, her namelessness. At the orphanage, during a celebration funded by her foundation, she stood before the children and spoke with raw honesty. "I once had no name," she said, "and I thought that meant I had no future. But your future is not tied to the name you are given. It is tied to the strength you carry." The children erupted in applause, their voices echoing against the cracked walls, turning scars into triumph. The scene was a celebration of everything she had fought for. Mama Nkechi dancing with pride, children chasing balloons, Chukwuma standing quietly at the back, his eyes shining. Aduke felt the circle of her life close, from abandonment in a market to belonging in a family built not by blood, but by choice. Their love balanced naturally between romance and vision. She did not dissolve into his empire, she expanded it with him. He did not overshadow her, he amplified her light. Together, they walked a path that was both intimate and public, rooted in respect as much as affection. In society, her influence soared. Newspapers no longer called her the pendant girl. They hailed her as the bridge, the woman who connected orphanages to corporations, streets to skyscrapers, tradition to innovation. Her story inspired young Nigerians to believe that resilience could rewrite destinies. Lagos itself became a stage for her triumphs. Nights at upscale lounges where Afro beats pulsed through neon lights, mornings at community kitchens stirring pots of egusi soup, afternoons on yachts where deals blended with laughter. Aduke moved through each world seamlessly, proving she belonged everywhere because she had once belonged nowhere. As she watched fireworks blaze above Echo Atlantic during a charity gala, she leaned into Chukwuma's shoulder, the city's reflection shimmering in her eyes. She was no longer haunted by shadows. She was the light. But even as the sparks painted the sky, a diplomat approached with a cryptic smile. "Miss Okafor," he said, raising his glass, "Africa has embraced you. But are you ready for the world?" Aduke's pulse quickened, sensing that while shadows had been conquered, new horizons and new trials were already on their way. A name is not just a label. It is destiny, love, and courage woven together. Dawn painted Lagos in soft hues of gold as Aduke stood before the towering windows of her high-rise apartment. The city sprawled endlessly, a living testament to chaos and possibility, and for the first time in her life, she looked at it without fear. She traced the diamond pendant at her neck, feeling not just the weight of Chukwuma's legacy, but the strength of her own. She was Aduke Okafor, fully, unapologetically, and the name no longer felt borrowed. It felt earned. Her journey had been long, turbulent, and marked by shadows. Yet standing there, she understood that the name she carried was not simply Chukwuma's gift. It was her own reclamation of destiny. From the market, where she was abandoned, to the mansion where she now resided, her story was not just about survival, but about transformation. That evening, Chukwuma invited her to the rooftop garden of the mansion, the same place where countless late-night conversations had tested their resolve now served as the backdrop for their quiet unity. The pool shimmered under moonlight, the air thick with the fragrance of hibiscus flowers. He reached for her hand, no longer with hesitation, but with certainty. "You are not just Aduke Okafor," he said, his deep voice steady. "You are the proof that resilience is stronger than bloodlines, stronger than wealth. You are my equal in love and in legacy." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. "And you are no longer the man hiding behind glass towers. You are the man who chose to share his world." They embraced, a cinematic moment framed by the Lagos skyline. The billionaire who had once been haunted by grief, and the girl who had once been nameless, now bound by something greater than either had imagined. Their story was not about rescue, but about two souls teaching each other how to live fully. In the months that followed, their legacy took shape. The orphanage flourished, no longer leaking roofs and hungry nights, but a vibrant space of opportunity. Computer labs glowed with new screens, classrooms echoed with the laughter of children, who now believed in futures once unimaginable. Aduke's foundation expanded, partnering with local leaders to create scholarships, skill centers, and mentorship programs across Nigeria. The empire itself reflected this transformation. Boardrooms once cold with numbers became spaces of innovation driven by human stories. Aduke's voice guided projects into places once ignored by profit-driven strategies. Chukwuma, once the sole figure of dominance, now stood proudly beside her, allowing the empire to be redefined through empathy and vision. And yet, power never dimmed their intimacy. On yachts drifting along the coastline, they laughed like conspirators sharing secrets. In offices lined with glass and steel, they debated fiercely before softening into understanding. In their mansion, amidst gala dresses and agbadas, they still stole quiet evenings where jollof rice simmered and stories from their childhoods folded into laughter. Love and leadership no longer pulled them apart. They converged seamlessly, one feeding the other. The cultural vibrancy of Nigeria wove itself into their lives, Aduke dazzled at galas in Ankara gowns embroidered with Swarovski crystals, bridging tradition and modern glamour. She attended rural festivals in Gale, tied with practiced elegance, dancing barefoot to talking drums. In Lagos's elite circles, she was not seen as an outsider anymore. She was celebrated as a woman who could dine with diplomats in Paris and still share suya under a streetlight in Surulere. Her childhood struggles, once silent ghosts, found closure. The teasing at the orphanage, the nights of longing, the sting of abandonment, all transformed into fuel for her mission. Betrayals that once cut deep became lessons in discernment. Every scar was no longer a wound, but a thread in the fabric of her identity. Chukwuma too found peace. He spoke openly of Ifunanya now, no longer with only grief, but with gratitude. "She taught me love," he once told Aduke, "and you taught me how to live it again." His heart, once a fortress, had become a home. Their final triumph was not wealth or power. It was unity. At a gala hosted in Lagos, with dignitaries, investors, and artists gathered under a ceiling of chandeliers, Aduke took the stage. She spoke not of profits, but of people, not of currency, but of legacy. "A name," she told the crowd, "is more than what you inherit. It is what you create. It is the courage to turn pain into possibility." The audience rose in thunderous applause, tears glistening in eyes across the room. Later that night, as fireworks lit up the lagoon and Lagos glowed like a jewel, Aduke stepped onto the balcony. The wind carried scents of the city she once feared, the city that now celebrated her. She leaned into Chukwuma's side and whispered, her voice steady and full, "I am named, and I am free." The camera would pan over Lagos, the markets alive with noise, the skyscrapers gleaming, the waters shimmering under moonlight, leaving viewers not only inspired, but breathless with the certainty that Aduke's story was not the end of a tale, but the beginning of a legacy. Aduke's journey may be complete, but more stories of love, betrayal, and power are waiting. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and don't miss the next unforgettable tale.